Hi, I'm Colleen Taylor. You're watching TechCrunch TV. This week, the Bradley Manning trial reached a verdict. And to make some sense of this, I'm very pleased to have in the studio with me Rainey Reitman, who is the co-founder and COO of the Freedom of the Press Foundation. She also works at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and she's the co-founder of the Bradley Manning Support Network. So if anyone is an expert on what is going on here, it's Ms. Reitman. And so thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And so there's a lot to talk about here, but I kind of want to keep it straight to the point. Just to get started, why should the tech industry care about the Bradley Manning trial? Can you give me sort of an overview here of what's at stake and what this means?
Sure. So Bradley Manning is an Army intelligence analyst who has actually pled guilty to taking documents and leaking them to the whistleblower website Wikileaks. Now, Wikileaks, as you and I know, is a publication. It's like any traditional newspaper, only it works in the online spaces. However, we have seen increasing concern from the government about how they're going to deal with WikiLeaks and the fact that they're publishing these documents that in some ways might embarrass the United States government or make clear things that the government might otherwise have wanted to keep in secret. And the backlash against Bradley Manning and the backlash against WikiLeaks really speaks to this attempt to push back against new forms of journalism, sort of technology-based forms of journalism that were really not possible decades ago, and try to prevent them from having the same sort of First Amendment rights to publish that have existed in traditional spaces. I think in particular I'm concerned at how the Bradley Manning trial has tried to paint Bradley Manning as more dangerous because he used technology in order to facilitate this leak.
And he leaked information about, it was torture, some sort of war crimes of sorts that seem to have been going on, correct?
That's right. A whole bunch of the information that he leaked actually pointed to war crimes. The various military law experts who have, for example, reviewed the video of the Apache helicopter in which U.S. soldiers did gun down Reuters journalists, showed that there were the way that the U.S. was acting in those ways actually constituted war crimes under international law. Now, beyond that, he also leaked other documents that showed there were much more civilian deaths in Iraq, that there had been a great variety of problems with how we were keeping detainees in Guantanamo. So he leaked a lot of things, but in particular many people were concerned that some of the things he leaked indicated abuses by the United States government, and they felt this information ought to have come out.
And I want to get to the verdict here in a minute, because obviously that was what was announced this week. But you've been following this trial for several years now. You've actually been in the courtroom.
It's true.
What in general has been going on? What's your read on how this trial has progressed?
So I have been in the courtroom. I was there for the majority of the pre-trial hearing, and then I went back when the trial got started. I saw Adrian Lamo testify twice now, which was very interesting. And I have been following this case basically from the day after it broke in the U.S. And I have been concerned about a number of things. One of the things I'm deeply worried about is how difficult it is for the regular public to get in and follow this trial. It's being held out in Fort Meade, Maryland. It's very difficult to get to if you don't have a car and aren't in the area. They're not broadcasting it. They're not allowing any sort of recording, and they're being very careful about whom they're giving press passes to. They only have a limited number of press passes, which makes it very difficult for the media to be there, especially the international media who has a hard time sending somebody there all the time. And in particular, this is difficult because they're not releasing transcripts about what happens on a daily basis, which makes it very, very difficult for the average person to get sort of up-to-date information about what's going on in the trial. It makes it harder for journalists to cover it.
And you all at the Freedom of the Press Foundation have been doing a lot of work against the odds to get this information out.
It's true. So the Freedom of the Press Foundation launched a campaign probably couple months ago now. It was a very short campaign where we were going to fundraise, crowdsource funding to pay for stenographers to go in there and sit in the media room and provide daily transcripts of what was happening in the courtroom, so it would be available to journalists so they could write stories about it. I mean, half the battle here is that we can't get the information to the hand of journalists, and then the American public doesn't know what's happening.
And
so, yes, we've been doing that, and successfully, against incredible odds up until now, managed to get stenographers in there and get transcripts of every single day.
And the verdict, explain to me, there's some good news here and some bad news here, right?
That's exactly right. So just to lay the groundwork, Manning has already pled guilty to the act of handing information to Wikileaks. He, if you were to give him the maximum charge to what he's already pled guilty to, it's 22 years in prison. Or he could be time served. The judge has a lot of leeway. The verdict that just came out found him not guilty of aiding the enemy, which was a huge deal. If Manning had been convicted of aiding the enemy, it would have been equivalent of saying that releasing information on the internet so that the public can consume it, you and I, the digital public, would be equivalent to handing it to our enemies of the United States. So we were incredibly heartened to see that Manning was found not guilty on that charge, also not guilty of espionage for releasing the collateral murder video, also not guilty of, there's one video which hasn't been made public. It's a video of a massacre in Afghanistan in which over 100 people died, over 90 are believed to have been school children. That video was one of the things he was alleged to have leaked. It's never been made public, and he was found not guilty of that. But he was found guilty of a whole bunch of other things. If you added up all of the maximum times that he could serve in prison as a result of what he was just found guilty of, it's 136 years, so it's equivalent to a life sentence. 5 espionage convictions.
Okay, so that is the good news and the bad news. But right now we don't know yet how long the sentence is going to be. We haven't arrived to that yet.
Right. So starting today is the beginning of the sentencing period. Now, this is a period, it's going to last between 2 and 4 weeks, in which the defense and the government are going to argue for what they think the appropriate sentence should be. Now, the judge has a lot of leeway here. She could decide that she wants to just give him time served. So the 3+ years that he spent in prison during this trial period, and then he could go free. Or she could do the maximum, 136 years. It's really entirely up to her. But this is the first opportunity we're going to have during the sentencing period to talk about motive, talk about the impact of these leaks on national security. The first time we're really going to be able to present more information than we have been able to during the trial.
Because the trial has been so laser focused on what specifically the trial's about.
Right. So the government, during pretrial hearings, the government made arguments and was successful in making arguments that prevented the defense from talking about Manning's motive during the trial. So during this entire whistleblower trial, Manning hasn't been allowed to really speak to why he did what he did, and they haven't been able to talk about the harm that resulted, or lack thereof, to the country as a result of these leaks. The government has been very firm in that whether or not he intended to give information to the enemy couldn't be discussed during the course of the trial. Now that we're in the sentencing period, the rules are a little more relaxed. We're able to talk about sort of the more sort of information about what was his motive, what was the impact of what happened, and then hopefully use that as an opportunity to educate the judge about what the appropriate sentence would be.
And speaking of this education of the judge, the Electronic Frontier Foundation and other people who have been watching the trial have said that a lot of time here has been spent just educating the judge about what the internet is and how it really works, and that there's been a lot of ignorance here among very smart people otherwise don't really understand technology so well. Is there anything that we can do about that?
That's an interesting question. I have been in the courtroom where they've been trying to explain to the judge what an IP address was, and it's been very worrisome to me that this individual who's going to ultimately be deciding the fate of this whistleblower doesn't really know that much about how the internet works, or at least they're certainly starting from ground zero and trying to educate her about that. This is a battle we face in all sorts of different technology-related litigation. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of what the Electronic Frontier Foundation does, but a lot of what advocacy groups that are concerned about civil liberties are doing is trying to make sure that as we move our society into these digital realms, we aren't losing our civil liberties just because courts and judges don't understand how the technology works and therefore don't understand how their decisions in this world will make a difference for civil liberties more generally. And that's, I honestly think that it's just going to take working to educate. I mean, long term, we've got to be teaching lawyers in law school how technology works. We've got to be teaching policymakers how technology works. We've got to get into the radar of lawmakers and ensure that when they're writing their laws, they're doing it in a way that makes sense for technology today and is sort of looking ahead to what technology might look down the road.
And if people are out there watching and they think that's very important, what can they do? What can we do to try and make it so that there aren't future Bradley Manning trials that are as messy and long as this one?
That's going to be an interesting question. I think we are likely to see future Bradley Manning-like trials that are messy and long, because I think we just saw Edward Snowden, admit to do his most recent leaks. You know, there's a couple of different issues. The work I do with the Bradley Manning support work, stuff I do on my spare time, is because I feel very strongly and passionately that what's going to happen to Manning could have a huge ramification for the future of journalism. So I'm just a regular person. It's totally possible that if you feel excited or concerned about a case, you can just go and get involved with it, right? You can just contact the organization that's working on those issues and say, I'd like to volunteer, here are my skills, I'd like to build a website, do tweets, what have you. Or if you don't have time to do sort of, individual advocacy for particular causes, the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is my full-time job when I'm not doing this outside advocacy, they're taking sort of a broader approach to using impact litigation and technology as well as advocacy to sort of ensure that civil liberties and technology mesh in the future. So I would encourage people to sort of investigate the issue, become well versed in it, find ways to speak out about what they feel passionate about, and join the organizations that make sense and are advocating for what they believe in.
Great. Well, Rainey Reitman, thank you so much for coming by.
Thank you.
And we'll be watching to see what happens in the future.
Thanks so much.